Hey everybody, it's Tara here to wrap up our week talking about CF-related diabetes or CFRD.
I got cystic fibrosis. See, I've got cystic fibrosis.
So I myself don't have CF-related diabetes yet. I've been classified as borderline a few times now, I guess. Basically, I have had the odd A1C test come back that's been on the high end. So we've kind of watched my levels. I've done random sugar checks. And I also, when I got my G-tube placed and started overnight feeds, my body was just under a lot of stress. So I ended up being kind of diabetic, I guess. For the first couple months, my sugars were just completely out of whack. So I did end up doing corrective insulin doses with that. But my first experience with sugar checking and insulin was actually way back in like 2010, I think. I was grade 11, maybe even into grade 12 as well. And my doctors kind of were at a point where I wasn't gaining weight, even though I was eating as much food as possible, drinking Scandi shakes, doing like everything we possibly could be doing. So they decided to try giving me a long-acting insulin just to see if maybe my sugars were just enough out of whack that they were maybe consuming a lot of my calories to try and get my body back to a normal level. So I was on insulin for, I want to say maybe even 6 months, and it didn't help with anything. During that time, I was also in and out of hospital. I was on IV, and that was kind of the lead up to my eventual transplant within a year of that. So I was doing sugar checks throughout the day. I was giving insulin when I first woke up in the morning, and then just kind of monitoring things. And then eventually we just called it quits because it wasn't helping, and I was kind of over having to stab myself. But the funny thing about insulin, when you have just the pen that you're giving it in, is that, you know, the nurse, they instruct you on how to use it and everything, and they tell you, like you can give it to yourself in your thigh, in your stomachs, like even at the side kind of thing. Or some people even use, you know, their upper arm. And I kind of said to her, I was like, well, where do you recommend? And she was like, oh, you know, just wherever you have the most fat. And at this time, I think I weighed maybe like 75, 78 pounds, if that. And I kind of just looked at her like, okay, where would you suggest on me? Because I don't have an ounce of fat and we're doing this to help me gain weight. Like, so I thought that was kind of funny. So I was doing it in my stomach. It took a lot for me to even be able to, like, I mean, the needle is teeny tiny. You can barely see it. Like, and even just to be able to stab that in my stomach, like, I just don't do well with needles. I don't do well with anything I have to do to myself. Like, I'm a wimp. So I did struggle with the needle aspect of it because I grew up hating needles, and I would have been like 17 at the time and just didn't want to do it. But you learn to get over that. As for the sugar checks, I mean, your fingers get raw and kind of like not scabbed over, but just the skin is kind of coarse. They get sensitive. Sometimes if you poke like a certain spot, you sometimes hit a nerve and it hurts. So I always have my needle dialed down to like the smallest possible prick, and then I try to just like squeeze enough blood out to check my sugar. Another thing I find that I kind of wanted to bring up with you guys, and maybe like give me your thoughts on this down in the comments below, was that every time I mention like, oh yeah, like people with CF can get diabetes. It's not type 1, it's not type 2, like we have our own type of diabetes because we're that lucky. Like, and people always go, oh my gosh, no way, like that's terrible. And I'm kind of like, living with CF, like life-threatening lung, digestive, full body illness, diabetes. I mean, the diabetes is pretty easily managed. Carb count, do your insulin, sugar checks. CF over here doesn't really have a cure, or I mean, there's treatments, but it's just to kind of make you feel better for a couple hours. So I always find that people are like not more upset, but just more like empathetic, I guess, when they find out you have diabetes or you could be diabetic. And I just, it kind of blows my mind. Like, I'm kind of like, in big picture here, diabetes is nothing. Like, I can handle this. So I'm wondering, like, I mean, I guess I chalk that up to the awareness around it. Like, everyone knows someone who is diabetic, or has heard of it. We've all seen the commercials. I have diabetes. I love that old man. I seriously just wanted to plaster it throughout this video. But I think it's like the awareness aspect, and just, I guess, we've been living our entire lives with CF, and like those friends, family, acquaintances, or whatever, when they find out we have diabetes too, like they're kind of like, oh, like I know what that is. I know what people have to do with that. Like they know about the sugar checks, the insulin, and everything. And they just react to that because they're not sure how CF works fully, I guess. They can't always see it other than if we're coughing, or if we look sick and our faces are tired, or, if we're really thin and we look like we're losing weight, but they can't see like inside our body that our lungs are crappy and our pancreas sucks and everything else, right? But I still just find it so weird even when I explain it to them. And I'm kind of like, like diabetes, this is like a side effect of CF almost, right? And they still like just react to the diabetes as if it's like you've just been told you're dying. And I'm like, I have CF. I have been dying since day one. We all have, let's be real. The biggest experience I've had then with sugar levels and insulin would be with my transplant and then my G-tube. So with all the medications that they put you on right after surgery for transplant, you're on a really high dose of prednisone. Your body's under a lot of stress. And your sugars just go insane, and you have to manage that. So almost every time that I have been in hospital since transplant, which probably 5 times, if that, maybe 1 or 2 more, I don't think I've been in very often. But every time I go in now, my sugars go wacky. And I think part of that is just the stress of being in the hospital and not feeling well and having to do extra meds, or, you're adding new pills to your everyday life. So my team almost classifies me, they say like I'm borderline, like we have to kind of watch it, but they also just say I kind of have like stress-induced diabetes. So after my transplant, I only was on insulin in hospital. Like the nurses were giving corrective doses of insulin. And then once my prednisone levels and my other medications, the doses kind of dropped. And once I got out of hospital and was recovering and kind of back to a normal life, the insulin stopped as soon as I left the hospital, basically. I think they had me checking my sugars still, maybe for a week or 2, just to make sure they were like back to normal. But it was more so just the stress of like your body going through surgery, all these new medications, and everything just being out of whack. So after that, I mean, I try to do my best and check the week before a CF appointment, just, which right now are really only, for the most part, they're once a year because I deal with my transplant team now, more so. Just so that when I meet with my dietitian there, like she has some numbers to go off of, and we can make sure that I'm still okay. I do my annual glucose test, which is that absolutely nasty drink, the like little soda pop bottles, and it's like syrup, but like extra thick and sticky, and it's orange flavored, which I'm not a big orange eater or drinking orange juice. And it's carbonated, and I also am weird and I don't really like carbonated drinks. So that drink is absolutely disgusting. And then you have to sit there for like an hour. You can't have anything else to eat or drink, and you're just sitting there going, please don't throw this up because it will be 10 times worse on the way up. So all of those test levels, I come back within normal range, on the higher end of normal. So we just kind of keep an eye on it. But otherwise, when I had my G-tube placed, basically I was getting an entire day's worth of calories and all the good stuff out of this feed. Overnight, plus the stress of having the tube put in, my procedure, they're really close to my ab muscle where my G-tube sits, and they had to kind of relocate my stomach a bit, just kind of like wiggle it around, I guess, which I found out afterwards. So it was just super stressful, and usually I was told I would be in and out in like a day or two. I ended up in there for a week. We just had issues adapting to the feed, and my stomach was super sensitive. So they did, after I had my tube placed and once I started my feeds, I got a new monitor for checking all my sugars, and I was sent home with a insulin that I want to say is long acting, but I don't think it is now that I think of it. Maybe I don't know if there's an in-between one, but essentially I was told to correct my sugars. So I would check them throughout the day just to make sure I was fine during the day, which I always was because I was just eating normally. I wasn't doing my feed. Then I would check them before bed if my numbers were high from whatever I'd eaten for dinner or if I'd been snacking right up till bed. I got a chart of here's how much insulin to give based on whatever number you're reading. Fun fact, in Canada, we use completely different number system to measure our sugars. So when I talk to people in the States who are like, oh, I had such a low today, I was at like 40. And I'm like, what the heck? Like 40 would be catastrophically high based on the numbers that we use in Canada. So it's a different metric system stuff, I guess, whatever. Also applicable to diabetes. So I would check and correct those with my feed. And then I was waking myself up halfway through the feed as well. One, to take some more enzymes, just to make sure I was digesting it and that my stomach wasn't getting even more upset on top of the whole procedure and everything. And then check my sugars. And if they were still high again, give another corrective dose. And then checking in the morning. So I had like those 3 checks that I had to do. And then throughout the day, it was kind of like if you get others. I feel the symptoms of a sugar high more in advance, and I can kind of be proactive about that. I can check my sugars like I think to check them. I kind of just get like agitated and just like I'm sitting and I feel like I'm like buzzing, like I'm bouncing, and I can't focus on my sentences, and I kind of lose my train of thought, or I just don't really know what's happening around me. Whereas with sugar lows, for myself at least, I'll be fine like sitting here talking, and then the next thing I know I'm seeing stars and it's starting to go black, or I'm suddenly in a cold sweat and I'm like, oh dear, this is not good, and I have to like sit down, quickly get something to drink, like a juice box or anything, and get some sugar into me as quickly as possible. So most people I talk to say they are more prone to knowing when they're going to have a low, like they feel those symptoms coming on more than a high. So I guess that's kind of opposite. But let me know if you have symptoms, if you're more prone to knowing that you're going high right now or if you're low. I am absolutely awful at carb counting, and I understand the process from like the science and math side of it, whatever. But having grown up with CF and always eating whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, because I need to put the weight on, I like refuse to look at labels and count carbs and calories. And if I'm hungry and I'm debating between a Rice Krispie square or like a granola bar, I'm like, which has more calories? But that's about all I do with nutrition labels. So when I talked to my team when I needed to be on it, they're like, we could teach you to carb count. And I think I tried for like 2 days and was just like, nope, this is not for me. I don't want to have to work this hard to eat. So that is why we got into the corrective insulin. And had I been on it longer than just a few weeks there, or like the month I was, we would have probably switched to, instead of a correction method, we would have switched over to kind of just learning like what foods or certain meals that I always went high after. So again, like another thing that I'm interested in to hear from all of you is, like, do you carb count? Did you not like it at the beginning? Did you get used to it? I guess kind of help me prep in case I ever end up fully diabetic. I mean, I know it's most likely I will, so that's just one thing that I was really stubborn about and kind of said, no, no interest in it. I enjoy being able to eat what I want when I want and not have to think about, how many cups of pasta am I putting into making my dinner tonight. So definitely leave your comments down below. Subscribe to us so you can stay in touch and give us your opinions. Next week, we're going into kind of, what do our daily, day-to-day lives look like, which I'm super pumped for. I'll be sharing a little bit of my clinic experiences being post-transplant with you guys. So check us out. I hope you enjoyed this video and all the other ones from this week. All of us have different experiences with diabetes, which I think is really cool and also shows that, nothing with CF, even diabetes, is the same for anyone. And this disease is just so sporadic. It kind of just does what it wants when it wants. So check us out, and remember, stay salty.